What's up, guys? This is Grayson Nichols, also known as the Dean221, and I'm here with Marco Capey, and we are the instructors at Elite Rounders Poker Coaching. Today, we pulled up an interesting hand, one of the more controversial hands over the last few years in the poker community, where Maria Ho flops a set of tens deep in the WSOP Europe event. So let's take a look first at these stack sizes, and then we'll take a look at the hand afterwards. So Marco, what do you got for us today?
All right, so we have Kempe opening hijack with a big stack, 95 big blinds, massive stack, and Bicknell calling with 53 big blinds from the button, and Farrell 3-betting with ace-king, also with a big stack, 53 big blinds, and Ho in the big blind with 49 big blinds. So now we will get back to start of the hand. So Grayson can say his ideas first.
Raising to 34,000, just a little bit over minimum.
So pretty standard open from Kempe, right? Nothing special so far.
I think it's a spot where Kristen could consider 3-bet bluffing sometimes, especially the ace-jack offsuit varietal, but I prefer the flat here, especially on the button. I think it would be a problem for someone as aggressive as Kristen to 3-bet with a hand like ace-jack suited in a spot where people think she's bluffing, and then she might face a 4-bet, and her hand would be too good to fold, not good enough to raise or call. So I like her call there quite a bit as well. Now we're obviously to Neil in the small blind. I think this is a slam dunk 3-bet. I like that he went larger sizing. I believe he goes about 150 here. I think that from out of position, he doesn't really want flat calls in this spot. So I think everything looks very standard up to this point. And here we are at the inflection point of the entire hand. Okay, so this is a tough spot for Maria, no doubt. Like, this is not easy. But let's take a look. There's already $250,000 in the pot, and Maria has around 700,000 herself. So something that Marco and I are very keen on instilling in our students is the concept that when you are faced with two suboptimal decisions, it typically means you made a mistake at the prior decision juncture. Okay? So what we're going to see is here, we're going to see Maria end up cold calling in this spot and getting into a pretty nightmarish spot post-flop, which by the logic we just used could deduce that her cold flat pre-flop was not the correct play. Marco and I have discussed this hand quite a bit, and I think that the move here is either an aggressive all-in, risk your 750K to win the 250K in the middle, or make an insanely tight fold, which I don't like here since Neil's going to be heavily weighted towards 3-bet bluffs in this spot. So it probably would have benefited Maria just to go ahead and move all in, and if everyone folds, that's a victory for her. She just increased her stack by 33%. If Neil calls, we got to hope it's ace-king, ace-queen suited. And then if we're behind to the 2 outs, we're going to have to suck out occasionally. But to me, this is a spot where Maria cold calling the 3-bet is bound to put her in some very difficult post-flop spots, like the one we're about to see here. So go ahead and hit play, and let's check out what ends up happening.
And still to point out that with pair of tens, if we are going to flop, you will see overcard basically 70% of the time, which means you will be just check calling one street and pretty much folding to every turn. And what happens now is that also when you flat, the people in position are getting way better price to call as well. So of course everybody ends up calling, and this is not what you want with pair of tens. Basically, pair of tens has a great equity versus a lot of hands, but the playability is questionable when you're flatting for potentially four-way pot. So, of course, sometimes it will go heads up, but that's definitely the downside here. And I agree with Grayson. We should be just happily shoving here. And based on the small blind, how aggressive he is, we should either even jam wider or tighter, based on the player. But this hand, it just plays so nicely as a shove.
Well said. I agree. And that was an excellent point by Marco. I mean, if 7 out of 10 times it's going to be overcards, you're just creating a very difficult spot for yourself post-flop out of position. So I'm with Marco. I think you 4-bet shove pre-flop here based on the players in the situation. And I think that if the small blind was a tight player who we're not sure has much of a bluff range, then you just have to make a really tight fold yourself. But I think calling just sets ourselves up for disaster later on, as Maria's about to unfortunately find out the hard way. So I think once she calls, It's an interesting spot for Rayner and Kristen. I mean, I think if I'm Rayner here, you know, you're getting a decent price. You are the chip leader. You are in position against both of the villains. I think it's reasonable to call here, but it feels like it's a pure set mine in this spot. There's also obviously the worry of, you know, running into even better pairs here and getting oversetted. So I think his call is okay. I think it's reasonable, especially with how deep Neil is and being in position. I think Kristen's hand is forced here once Rayner calls, because now the price is just so good and it's pretty obvious what she's looking for. She's just looking to smash some spades. So I think this makes sense. And here we are with 650,000 going to a massive flop where
fun things happen.
Oh boy. And this is it. This is it. This is where Maria's like, God damn it. Why didn't I just shove pre-flop? This is not going to be fun. There's just nothing good coming for her. Fascinating, too, that Kristen gets top pair, top kicker, and Rayner has a gut shot straight flush draw amidst all of this nonsense. So Neil just moves all in, which I think is, I can't imagine doing anything else. I think his play is perfect here. It's also an interesting spot where I think that this is what he would be forced to do with a number of holdings. Like, I imagine if we were sitting there. So, Marco, what would you do if you had red aces or red kings here? Because to me, I feel like I would just jam those in this spot kind of in the same fashion. What do you think?
Well, that's a good question, you know, but it does make me believe that we are very capped when we do this. By capped, I mean we have ace high flush draw or king high flush draw, or we have overpair. Of course, like, I mean, capped, that's still like incredibly strong range. But the problem is here, I don't think he's jamming like queens without of hearts, for example. I think hand like that, it's a really nasty spot. Like, I don't know if you even want to bet call versus 3 players. It's a very nasty spot if you have like queens here. I'm not sure what the play
my next
would
question.
Be. That would be really funny.
My next question. What you would do with ace kings that are black? Yeah.
But that's the thing. I think he's probably just checking those. It's so close because like if you bet anything, you will be kind of priced into call, and I don't think you want to call a jam here, like versus from someone else. So it's like queens. Is it just bet fold on this board? It's probably close. So in that case, I think I'm just checking. Like if he has, that's what I think. If he has queens here without heart, I think he's checking. But if he has queens with the heart, he's jamming, hoping even 2-pair might fold, or I don't know. There's not too many 2-pairs. I guess Ho probably doesn't have Jack 10 suited. But in this case, I don't think he's jamming even kings without the heart. So his range is really...
black aces and kings, you're saying the same thing, right? Like he might bet fold or check fold. God, that sounds crazy, but very possible.
That sounds crazy, but I don't think your equity will be very good. But I lead towards more like checking and seeing what happens. Like if there's like one player bets, another one calls, it's close that we could probably fold. Like it sounds insane, but it is really tough spot.
I think it's also, there's just a number of hands that also make sense for, so what else do you think Neil would shove here? I think he shoves ace king, ace queen. I think he shoves both of those with a naked heart. I think he shoves red aces, red kings, red queens. Here's the one for you. Would Neil ever open shove jack, jack, jack here? Because I think that is a really important spot for Maria as well, because I think that everything she's going to be up against here, she's in pretty good shape against for the most part, right? Except for jack, jack, jack. So do you think there's a chance that could be in the range?
I don't think so. Like when the villain blocks exactly hand which could call, something like, I don't know, ace jack with the jack of hearts, ace of hearts and jack of whatever, spade maybe. I mean, Big Nut could have that. Maybe Kempe, I don't know. I think Kempe might fold pre-flop though. But like they could have hands like that. So I don't see a point jam with this hand because like it's okay. Like we will sometimes hit a full house on turn. If somebody jams, it's an easy call. I think when you block their top range, I think it's fairly easy to just bet call. But like this, I don't know. To me, his range looks very capped here. Like you said, it's capped to aces, kings, queens. Like you call that cap range, but it sounds kind of insane in this spot. But yeah,
because usually we refer to the capped ranges as something that, you know, they're not that strong. But in this case, he's capped, but he has 5 strong hands that he can have. So to me, I think it's those 5 hands that he shows up with here. And I think that's kind of it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think it's going to be those hands. Like, and now the question is, what kind of equity does 10-10-10 have against those hands now, right? And so that's going to be the question that Maria has to answer to herself in this spot.
Yeah, exactly. Again, if we find ourselves basically versus kings with a heart or ace king with one heart, basically we don't assume that Farrell would jam any flush here. If he has ace king, he's not shoving here. He will just bet whatever, one third of the pot or something and just call, because like there's no point shoving, I think, unless he has some leveling game going with someone, maybe, but I don't think so. If he's a great player, maybe he can do that to induce a call, like wider call. It would be great play, probably in this case. But as you can see, it wouldn't work because Ho ends up even folding tens here, which is insane. But again, the equity here, we should be roughly 65% versus range of ace of heart and king of clubs, like in this case. Or if he has kings with one heart, it's like 64% here with with a pair of tens. So it's still a clear call because the pot is massive. Ho can double up here, winning 65%, give me all day. And again, one thing we want to point out, so like you told me, 1 out of 118 hands, right? You actually flop a flush. So the chance of somebody having here flush is really marginal, especially when you take in account that Farrell is jamming probably ace of hearts or king of hearts or queen of hearts. So that makes it even less likely that they have a flush. So I think for Ho, this is fairly easy spot to call. So again, that's my conclusion. What would you add here?
Yeah, I think you're spot on, and I really like how you talked about ruling out the top portion of his range. I don't think he's going to have ace, king of hearts ever when he jams. I don't think he's going to have jack, jack, jack. And that is a really important concept that we're going to run into a lot in tournaments. You know, the idea of eliminating the top portion of your opponent's range when you're figuring out what they have. If he had the top portion of his range here, if he could have ace, king of hearts and jack, 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 now her fold makes a lot more sense. But when you take those out of the equation, I don't think she can make the fold in this spot, unfortunately. But we do recognize that it is a nightmarish situation to be in. And I think it's really important that you shouldn't be calling in spots where even when you hit your money cards, there's a chance that you're not going to be able to continue. That means it's a questionable call to start with, I would say.
Exactly. This is the dream flop basically for 10-10. Like, I mean, it's not like you're going to flop better. You got that one overcard, but you also hit the set. So that's the best you can hope, basically. And the thing is, like, if you fold this, I think we see a little bit, to me, like from the mental side of the game, this looked like to me that she didn't want to push the edges pre-flop because it looks like I don't want to spew my stack with tens here, even though it's not a spew, but it's more like I'm not sure what I should do here, so I end up calling with tens. And then you end up on a flop, and you're even more clueless. So it's like, I do feel like maybe this was a little bit like mental game thing here, that you end up making like mistake, and then like you didn't want to make one more mistake by calling on flop versus very tight range. So I think it's probably a mental game thing here in this hand. It's kind of funny.
Well said. And I think it's really important, and we can leave it on this note too. I think oftentimes people have this it's like this cognitive dissonance issue where they think in their head like, oh, my hand's too good to fold, but not good enough to raise, so I'm just going to call and see what happens. And we're here to tell you that that is going to put you in some of the toughest spots you can imagine. And that when you're in these spots, it will typically be beneficial to you to take an aggressive approach, like an aggressive re-raise or shove, or a tight and careful fold. But when you choose the middle ground of just calling to see what happens, it's going to put you in difficult spots later on very frequently. So I think it's important to remember that when we're making our decision-making pre-flop.
Exactly. It doesn't matter like how good of a player you are. If you're planning here tens versus 3 world-class players, you will be in trouble on this flop. It doesn't matter if your name is Phil Ivey or Marco Gaby or Grayson Nichols, you know, it doesn't matter. You will be in terrible spot either way. So I think it's like either shove or basically fold, I think. So like we talk about, and based on the small blind, we should make our decision, like in this hand. But yeah, flop definitely you can't fold as well. That's something we have to point out here. That somebody flopping a flush, it's so rare. So yeah, okay. But Yeah, if you like the hand, I hope you will watch second one. So let us know how it went.